Amen. Reverend Robert, you're going to kick us off.
Yeah. Well, I was going to give some preliminary remarks, but I think that prayer covered it. So as we begin, first of all, I want to thank Don and David Getz and Bruce Williams for the work that they have put into this forum over the course of the last couple of weeks, and especially some of the work that they've done over the past couple of months. And as we begin this, I want to remind us of why we're here, which is not simply to look and review numbers, but to listen together for what God is telling us and might be saying through them. So the information that David and Bruce will share tell a story. All budgets do. And one of the stories that we see in this is a story of a community that has been faithful, that has been generous, that has been resilient, and deeply committed to the shared call of our life with God. And they also, as always, tell us the story of a moment that asks something of us, how we continue to discern, how we are continuing to be a people moving forward. So as we go through this, I encourage us not to think of this just as a financial conversation, it's a spiritual one. How do we, as disciples, participate in God's work
Recording
in
in
the world
progress.
through our worship and our service and, yes, our giving? One of my favorite phrases from St. Benedict of Nursia is, listen well and attend with the ear of your heart. And so I invite us to attend with the ear of our heart that we might see clearly and listen prayerfully, and then ask together, how will we sustain the mission that God has given us to do? But more than that, to ask individually and personally, what part is mine to play in sustaining the ministry that has shaped me and blesses others? So with that, David, if you please.
Can I have the next slide, Craig? So, a friendly face. We know and love her well. And I thought we'd just start. You'll see a few photos through this presentation because, as Reverend Robert said, it's not just about numbers, right? It's about people. It's about you. It's about our story. So, various aspects of ministry here and our welcome table and our greeters are an important part of that. Next slide, please. So there are a few of us who are going to go through the slides. We have 6 important topics, and each topic is 1 page in the handout or printout that you have. These are kind of the substantive numbers. And again, as Robert said, we're trying to illuminate and tell our story. So we've assembled the data let's call it the best data we could in the time over the last 6 years to give you some perspective on where we've been and where we are. And we'll talk a little bit about where we're going, a little bit. Please feel free to ask any questions. However, with the 6 slides we have, we do want to get through them. So if you could hold your questions till we get through the 6 key slides, that would be helpful, only because I always worry we get sidetracked and we don't get through the important 6 slides. Next slide, please. So, another one of our lovely ministries. You heard them this morning if you were here at 7:45, and you'll hear them again if you are going to 10:15. And they, I always feel like they light up our eyes, right? Next slide, please. So, I'm going to cover first just membership pledge history here. You have the printouts. I hope you can read the numbers up here. There are a lot of numbers, and so, again, I'll try to help guide you through them. First comment on this is the parochial membership are the numbers we report to the diocese every year, and historically, they were perhaps slightly overstated. The reason is, it's always hard to know how many members we have. People come, but they don't tell us when they go. And our staff has scrubbed the parochial membership list a couple of times in this 6-year period. So the reductions you see there are not necessarily people leaving and just going away. They are our staff's recognition that we haven't seen this person or family in 4 years. Do you think they're really, it's that kind of a thing. So we do it once in a while. So, but we do report this to the diocese, and it gets rolled up into the national church and our numbers. So we share them with you. What's probably more indicative are the average Sunday attendance numbers. Again, those are a count or estimate that our ushers do every week. And so they're not, this isn't necessarily a science, but it's a much better indicator of what's going on. And with COVID coming, we started worshiping online. Now, counting online numbers can be more challenging. It's not, people in the pews. And I highlighted 2024, and you can see the number there is 71. The note on that is the national church changed the way that we defined or counted online worshipers. So what I've heard from our staff and Reverend Robert is we think instead of 71, that's probably closer to 150 if you want an apples-to-apples comparison with the numbers in the previous years. Finally, pledging households, we track that pretty carefully. That is, so in 2019, for example, there were 437 pledges submitted for the 2020 year, and you can see that those numbers. So the key takeaways, actually our average Sunday attendance goes up and down. Pledging households, of course, are declining, and you can see that. And I just made a note that the average pledge per household has been increasing, just so you know. Now, next slide, please. We have a couple of graphical representations. These are from the data that you have printed on the page. So there's nothing new here other than the visual. And I like visuals because they convey information in a different way, and in my opinion, a more impactful way, because you can see trends or you see things that are not trends. Next slide, please. So again, same kind of information. This is percentage of income that we get from those pledges, right? So this is actual monies received in terms of plate and plate plus plate and pledge. So the difference between the two lines is the plate income, right? I didn't put another line there, it's small. So again, you can see here that there is a clear trend that's evident. The point is the percentage. So just the takeaway for me here is, part of what we're doing is information. Part of the benefit for the church of pledging is it helps establish budgets. It gives us a sense of how to plan. And in that, what I call recurring income is not here, but we'll talk about it in a minute. Recurring income is the money that we can count on. That's pledges. We can count on plate, and we don't know as much about it. And then the third I'll mention area of recurring income, in my view, is our foundation creates earnings, and we take a distribution from that every year. It's around 100,000, a little more. There's another slide on it. But the point is the percentage of our recurring or confident income is going down. And that's a challenge for our leadership, right? So with that, I'm going to ask Bruce Williams to come up and go through some of the gory details of income and expense.
Good morning. So you asked for it, and here it comes. My name is Bruce Williams, and I am your treasurer. Since Don asked me to be treasurer about a year ago, most of my time has been spent overseeing the installation of a new accounting system. The goal of the new system was to increase transparency and accessibility, and we're making significant progress, but we are not done yet. I don't see Sarah Colmark, but if she was here, she has been an enormous help in this whole project. And so whenever you see her, just say thank you for helping us add clarity to our financial situation here at St. Barnabas. Okay, so.
Bruce, you've got a picture slide just to let you know it's coming up.
Okay, yeah, so next slide, please. And next slide after that. Okay. I don't really need to see that. So let's focus, if you will, on the income side of this chart. We've got it divided into income and expenses, and David was talking about the first two rows in the chart, pledge income and plate income. I'm going to add a little bit more detail to what he told you. As he already mentioned, 2019, 2020 were kind of a high water mark for our church. Attendance was strong, contributions were strong, everything was good, and then we had COVID. So in 2019, our total pledge income and plate income, and I'll refer to that periodically as our recurring income because that's what recurs every year, and you'll see the reason for that distinction in a minute. But in 2019, it was 1.8 million was the total pledge and plate. Through 2024, it's gone down about $100,000 a year to 1.7 million. So over this almost 7 years, our recurring revenue has been stable to declining. Now let's hop down and look at the expense categories. The first two expenses are clergy and administrative staff, and that's just under 60% of our expenses. These expenses were 1.2 million approximately in 2019, and they've gone up 100,000 to about 1.3 million at the end of 2024. So that's a 12% increase. And when you have revenues that are flat to declining and expenses that are flat to increasing, you create a gap. And so our job is to figure out how we can close that gap. And now if you'll go back to the income side of the chart, you'll see vestry funds. And vestry funds are those gifts that are given to the church that the vestry can use for in the best interest of the church. These numbers are usage, not total funds. And in 2019, you can see we used a lot of vestry funds. We were supporting a major growth impetus. But then in 2020, that number drops by half to 164,000. It drops again in 2021 to about 124,000, same for 2022. And then in 2023, it more than doubles to 300,000. In 2024, it almost doubles again to 538,000. And this year, we hope we're over the top there, and we're going to be about 458,000 use of our vestry funds. So we have a finite amount of vestry funds. And so we have taken a serious bite out of our reserves. And so this is a challenge that I present to the parish, that we're going to need to replenish that reserve and hopefully increase our income. And the only other choice then would be to reduce expenses. So let's look at the next, which is the graph of this information. Next slide. So the blue line is total expenses. And you can see how that line continues to march upward. The yellow line is our total recurring income. And you can see where that line over most of the last 7 years has been flat or declining. And that gap is what we have filled with vestry funds, and that's something that we can't do forever. Next slide, please. So as takeaways, as I mentioned, 2019 into 20 were sort of the high water year for us. In 2020, with COVID, we cut expenses. We received a significant federal money contribution. Since 2022, recurring income is declining. Since 2020, expenses have been increasing. And our reserves, which cover this gap, as I mentioned, is shrinking. So the good news is that as a response to this realization, the staff and Robert have been working on ways to narrow this gap. And our original 2025 budget projected a deficit of $139,000 for this year. We think now that that's going to be a $2,000 surplus. So things are starting to turn around, but we need to keep the momentum building. Next slide, please. So Family Promise is just one of those bright spots in our parish, and it's funded by your generosity and your support, the kind of support that we see all the time in this parish. Next slide, please. So turning to gifts and bequests history, briefly, this is a summation of all of those non-recurring gifts that come into the foundation or our investment side of the church. And I will be focusing on the total gift income, which is the bottom bolded line. But I just wanted to explain to you that bequests are estate gifts. And the gifts on here are gifts of $5,000 and more, which are given that are unrestricted, that can again be used by the vestry. And then memorial gifts are pretty self-explanatory, as is interest. What you can take away from this is look at the volatility and the variation of these numbers. We start with 200,000 in 2019. We jump to 800, back to 300, down to 200, up to 350. So it is very difficult to plan a budget for the church based on a source of income which has become increasingly more important, which is this variable. So just to add a couple more facts, from 2019 to 2023, our average gifts and bequests were $375,000. That's for a 5-year period of time. For the last 2-year period of time, it's been $175,000, which is about half that. And we have a graph now, please. Next slide. Which Jeff sort of shows how gifts and bequests have gone. And I think I'm going to, I'll be here to answer questions at the end of our hour, and we've got lots of time for you guys, so hopefully you'll ask some questions.
Thank you, Bruce. Next slide, please. Another one of our joyful examples of ministry at St. Barnabas and the product of your generosity. The reason that Sarah and I came to St. Barnabas in 2001 was because our oldest daughter, we just moved from New York, she was a freshman in high school. She sat at a table at Chaparral High School and met this young man, one of the Bell boys, Jeff and Pam Bell. And they bonded, and he told her that we should go to St. Barnaby because it was a really cool church. And that's how Sarah and I came here. Youth and an invitation. Next slide, please. So I'm going to just mention the foundation. I'll say the foundation is a complex and deep topic. So if you want a deep dive in foundation stuff, now is not the time. But The foundation is, in essence, where we handle our investments, right? And what you see here is the total amount of foundation funds at the end of each year and the average or the annual return net of fees, so after we pay the advisors, right? And you can see that actually we've done really well. Now, 2022 was the fallout from COVID. That was a down year. Again, I'm not going to go through the details, but the key takeaways here, one is we're blessed to have an endowment. There are a lot of churches that don't have anything. The other thing to take away here is that the today $4 million or so in the foundation is comprised of two types of money. The majority of the money are restricted gifts. They're gifts that have come to us where a donor has said, you can use this money for X, and we honor that. Those monies are not available to fund the operations of our church, so we call them restricted, right? And there's another category of money that the foundation manages, which is unrestricted gifts, or monies that we just get, as Bruce outlined, and we invest them, hopefully conservatively. So the foundation does both. So when you see $4 million, you could say, gosh, we got a ton of money. What are we worried about, you know? Come on, David, things are great. You're right. And not all of that is available. Now, it's awfully complicated when you get into the details of how much in each year, how's the money invested, what are the funds, all that stuff. So I just mentioned this because it's part of our financial picture. But to me, you shouldn't look at this and go, hey, St. Barnabas doesn't need my money. That is not what we're trying to say, but we're trying to be honest and truthful and explain we're blessed with an endowment. Next slide, please. Again, this is an important part of our life. I selected a bunch of photos. You know, you can. There were way more photos than opportunities here, but the point of trying to share these examples with you is that this is why we're grateful, and this is what is a result of your gratitude, is the ability to worship in different ways. Next slide, please. Now, we've talked about vestry funds a bit. I'm going to talk about them just a little more to be really clear. This has been a topic that there's been confusion around it for a long time. It's an easy thing to say vestry funds. Yeah, what does that mean? We talk about reserves. Well, what I'm trying to show here is there are different results. So vestry funds budgeted or expected, that is that first line in the income statement that Bruce talked about, right? So that is when the budget gets put together, looking ahead, that's the money we think we have to pull out of reserves to balance the gap that we're projecting, okay? And you can see how that number's bounced around. Then I do include a line for foundation special distribution because in this current year, starting back in January, I think, the foundation trustees, and again, we can talk about that, they're members of the parish who help manage that and work with our advisor, but we talked about the outlook for 2025, and we knew, based on the budget that we got in January, that it was looking to be a big challenge. So the foundation looked at all the funds we had and decided that there was extra monies in there that had accumulated over time that were unrestricted. So the foundation said to leadership, hey, we could make a kind of one-time special distribution. So I show that here because it is not recurring. This is a one-off. We can't necessarily do this every time we're in trouble. Year-end deficit surplus, right? Now that is the result of the actual, income versus expenses with the budgeted vestry funds. So you can see that in some years, 2020, for example, we had a surplus. And that was fundamentally a result of the work that Jeff Bell did to get us $200,000 from the federal Paycheck Protection Program that the government laid out for COVID, right? So we got $200,000. That's fundamentally why we had a surplus. But the point here is that the bottom line in bold is the actual amount of monies we have to pull every year from reserves. It's what we budgeted and expected, and then it's at the end of the year you say, well, how do we do? So Bruce's point was what we budget as a surplus or a deficit this year we hope is very small. But just bear in mind, we're still expecting to use $458,000 of reserves and the $125,000 kind of special distribution, right? So this suggests, and it's a forecast, but 581,000 almost out of our reserves is a lot of money compared to the historical trend. Next slide, please. And here's what the graph looks like. So this is that bottom row over time. And as Bruce has indicated, well, he didn't indicate, but the average in the last few years is a lot higher than it used to be. Next slide, please. So key takeaways are, as you've heard, usage of our vestry funds, our reserves have been increasing. And we continue to use an increasing amount of that, and that's just not sustainable, right? We expect to end this year with about 1.2 million of reserves of vestry funds, and hallelujah for that. I wanted to say that this is our goal, and it's coming from our leadership, but we're also in a rector search in a time of transition. And we certainly want to call the right person to that, and Trish Rifo talked about it, I won't, but the point is when we invite a new rector, we really would like them to come here and have some financial flexibility. So we're hoping we can preserve at least $500,000 for them as reserves, that when they arrive, whenever that is, they know that they've got a good financial church, and if things go wrong or there's, problems, that they have a cushion. We also think next year, we don't know because we don't have the budget yet. The budget doesn't get made up till after, frankly, pledges are in, so we know how to plan for. So you'll hear about the budget at the annual meeting in January. But we might have to use up to $500,000 of our reserves for that. So those two numbers together will use up most of our reserves. So it's just, on the one hand, the good news is we have these monies available. Thanks to your generosity, to those that came before us, to people who've named St. Barnabas in their estate plans and their wills, all of the above. We also want to be prudent and good managers and stewards of what we have. So looking ahead is important. All right, I'm going to turn it over now to Reverend Robert, who's going to talk about really the recognition, you've heard about it, that we have a problem, and our leadership had decided to make some changes, and Robert wants to go into the plan.
Hi. Thank you. Can I have the next slide, please? I'm going to switch to this one now. Y'all are in for a treat today. You've seen the children's choir up there and the adult choir. I did not know what they had planned today for music, but when they come in for the offertory, watch for the fact that there's going to be 4 different directors coordinating a children's choir, a handbell choir, and the adult choir at the same time, performing a piece of music that is just glorious. It's one of the ways in which St. Barnabas uses beauty as a way of bringing us closer to God, but also for those who are participating in choir to have a sense of deepening of their own prayer. I think it was St. Augustine of Hippo who said, "He who sings prays twice." And those who listen have an opportunity to experience something of the goodness of God in that. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So in March, we started recognizing that some significant changes needed to be made, and part of that was a conversation with the staff, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But when I became the priest in charge in July, yeah, that's right, July, wow, okay. when I became the priest in charge in July, we knew that we were going to need to be taking some drastic measures. And this chart represents what those measures were, knowing that this was going to need to be on an annualized basis because for us to be able to make the changes that we needed to make in personnel, we also wanted to make sure that what we did not create, I don't know how to say this, it's never an easy thing to let someone go. It's never an easy thing to tell someone we have to take you from full-time to part-time. But how do you do that in a way that tries to make it a little bit easier to create enough cushion? So some of the changes that we made on the personnel side, we just knew we were not going to see the benefits of those reductions in 2025. Part of that was making sure that we did right by Ann, but also making sure that those who we were taking from full-time to part-time had a couple of months warning to be able to find something else in order to supplement their income. So with that being said, that was our annualized savings that we foresee going into 2026, where recognizing that we were going to be going as a parish from a 4-priest parish to a 3-priest parish once a new rector arrives. And then the reduction that we had for several of our full-time positions to part-times, and that hit our AV team and our facilities team. Then with our music program, they have a couple of different funding sources, but they were able to make that $12,600 reduction, and then also that $10,000 reduction in a couple of different ways. Now, what I asked the staff to do, or what we asked the staff to do in March of 2026, we said that we may need to figure out a way to trim our costs by 10%, and in the case of maintenance by 15%. And with all of that put together, I'm not sure what's up with those two numbers, but that goes to an annualized savings of around $302,000. So that's how we're planning on entering 2026.
Just to mention, they're correct in the handout.
They are correct in the handout, yes.
You can read the numbers.
Yep. I want to say something about our staff. With a course correction that was signaled in March but not made official, our staff responded. And this is not a staff that wastes a lot of money or goes over budget pretty often. In fact, quite often the opposite. Just this past week, I was looking at their materials because we're starting to ask the questions around, okay, what do you need for 2026? You've made some adjustments already. What if the adjustments that you have made are sustainable as is, or where do we still need to talk about what we need to do with your ministries? And as I was looking through their documents, we're in November, and they're under budget by 40%. They're under budget by about, in some cases, the range is from 40 to 70% under budget. This is a staff that has tried to do a lot of things to make that happen. And so we're approaching 2026 asking, how do we maintain what we've done? Like, what keeps us able to do the ministries that we want to do in ways that are sustainable? And where is there still opportunity to cut? So that is what your staff is doing at this parish. They have already been asking those questions. And when it comes to operations and facilities, they are bulldogging on a number of different issues, including working with our vendors to make sure that our contracts are lined up and we're getting exactly what we expect that we're paying for. So I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But actually, can we have the next slide, please? Thank you, sir. Additional things that we're trying to do, and as I talk through this, I want you to hear a couple of invitations to help and serve, because when I was approaching a lot of the choices around how we might make some of the cuts, I was making an assumption that the people of this parish would continue to be who they are, and incredibly generous and willing to step in and to help. So there may be ways in this slide that you can hear a couple of invitations. Part of what we wanted to do was start focusing our online and hybrid offerings primarily towards Sunday mornings, which we've done quite a bit of, but realize that that is in terms of staffing. That doesn't mean that you can't have something happening online or hybrid in any other part of the week, but it does mean that there's an opportunity here for others to step in and learn how to run that sort of technology to make it work. So there's an invitation there as well. And then also inviting parishioners further into the care of our grounds. We made some cuts to our facilities staff as a result of the measures, but part of that is also to recognize there are ways to help around this place. We have a Buildings and Grounds Committee that helps us understand how we might work on making sure that our grounds are primarily safe, and then thinking about how do we continue to make it increasingly sustainable over the course of time. And then we want to be strategic in managing our building in order to save use on utilities. So if you come to us and ask us for a room to use for a meeting, we may say, hey, that room that you've requested may not be the right one for us, but maybe we can put you in a building that's already open so that we're not starting an air conditioner in July in a building, but instead we were able to consolidate a little bit. That helps us save on our utilities. We're undertaking a total review of our landscaping and upkeep costs and thinking about what this might mean in the coming months and years in terms of planning. Y'all are aware of our capital campaign, Welcoming the Neighborhood, that is entering its 8th year because it's not done yet. So we had to hit the pause button during COVID, and there were 3 phases of Welcoming the Neighborhood. We've done 1 and we've done 2, but we haven't done the 3rd phase yet, which was around the grounds. And so part of what we want to do before we reapproach phase 3 of Welcoming the Neighborhood is ask, what does it cost to maintain what we have now? And then what do we want our place to do for us? How are we using our space? Does our space help us gather community? And in what ways does it do that? So it's more than just affordability. It's also how are we using and leveraging what we have here beyond just a place that looks beautiful? How does it help us create community and foster our relationships with each other? We have been working on switching to LED where possible, like the sanctuary lighting project. By the way, you're going to be able to see in the sanctuary today. We had a representative from Lehigh out here this weekend who helped us get our lights programmed. So that project is very nearly all the way done. We have moved over to something that allows us to automate our controls on our AC. We're talking about reductions in printing, which if you'll notice and appreciate perhaps, in our services, everything is contained in the bulletin. We do that for a few reasons. One is it's welcoming. And if you've been in an Episcopal church for a while, you know how to juggle books, right? There are times when I have a prayer book open and a hymnal open under it, and then I've got the service leaflet. We try to avoid having a situation where that happens, but there may be different ways in which we can work our bulletin that still has a welcoming spirit to it, but allows us to cut some printing in that particular area. And our bulletins cost us probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $6,000 a year. So there are ways in which we can address some costs there. I told you our operations and our maintenance staff is fanatical about working with vendors, renegotiating our contracts, and getting as much out of them as possible. And then we're also working on identifying and increasing our own efficiencies in the way that we do things. half of our staff at this parish has turned over in the last 5 years. We're not done. Our assistant to the rector is retiring in December. And so, December. So with all of that, we went from a fairly stable staff going into 2020 to all of these turnovers. And as a result of that, a lot of the implicit understandings about how we work together kind of got lost along the way. And so we're continuing to figure out how do we work together? How do we increase our own efficiencies through all of that? So we're always asking those sorts of questions. There's something that's not on here that I do want to mention, though, and this is not necessarily cost savings, but it is important because I'm not a fan of the idea that you cut yourself to health. I do think it's important to continue to ask, how is it that we make ourselves known to people, and what is it that we're constantly called to do? Discernment is a never-ending process. So we had a benefactor who came forward who helped us pay for a communications audit so that we can understand how we present ourselves to the larger community. For us to be able to understand how do we tell the story of the goodness that's here. And so that communications audit is going on right now. Our communications director, Manny Fimbris, has been in conversation with them over the course of the past 2-3 months or so, and that work continues. So we're looking into different ways of not only figuring out what do we cut, it's also how do we continue to tell about the goodness of St. Barnabas, and how do we continue to experience that. Can I have the next slide, please? I do not know of another parish in the diocese that has monthly half-day quiet days. For instance, the way contemplative life runs through the DNA of this parish is something that I think helps us stay grounded, gives us a sense of our relationship with God, and is one of the things about St. Barnabas that I think makes us unique compared to not only other Episcopal parishes, but other churches. It's part of the goodness of what we offer, not just to Episcopalians, but to those who might be looking to give Christianity a second, third, fourth chance, or a sense of asking, I don't know exactly what I think about organized religion, but spiritually, I think I can be fed here and see what might happen as a result of that, whether or not they come closer into the orbit of St. Barnabas or not. This for contemplative life is one of the ways in which I think we help feed a world hungering for something spiritual that they may not be receiving elsewhere. Next slide, please. Pretty soon we're going to go into questions and answers, and I'm not trying to preach a sermon here to avoid that time. But we wanted to share a little bit of the realities of where we stand and the steps that we're taking to be faithful stewards. But as I said, these numbers are not the end of the story. There are other stories that can be told from them, but they hold a mirror up to our shared calling, and they can be a place where we reflect. On Welcome Sunday, so many years ago, in September, I said that our finances deserve attention and they need care and good stewardship. And I hope that this morning shows that we are paying attention. And I still think it points us back to a deeper question about how we respond to God's generosity, because that's part of the story here, is generosity. There are churches who want our problems. And at the risk of oversimplifying things, a presentation like this invites a number of different responses. One of those is an anxiety response. And an anxiety response does a few things for us. First of all, it pushes us to cut and constrict, to discount possibility, to short-circuit our discernment because we just have a knee-jerk no to anything that might come up. And it can encourage giving, but that's rooted in a fear response. And I don't want that for us. The other response faces the same reality, acknowledges that reality, and then asks what's the most faithful way forward. So I want to talk a little bit about what the ethos around St. Barnabas has been around giving. At St. Barnabas, giving doesn't mean meeting a budget. It means becoming a people. It means being a people formed by trust and gratitude and shared purpose. It's a way of saying, I believe in what's happening here because it's part of what made me who I am and who I want to be. So today what that might mean is, as you're discerning before Gratitude Sunday, which is next Sunday, that if you've pledged before, you might consider how gratitude leads you to grow. Or maybe if you've never pledged before, there's a call to step further into the discipleship of giving toward the mission that you were involved in and taking ownership of a mission and your church. Now, David mentioned pledges of financial support help us plan faithfully. They give us what we need in order to steward our resources wisely and so that we can say yes with confidence to the ministries God calls forth among us, both those that are already here and then for us to ask, what is God calling us to do next? An anxiety response says, you can't ask that question. You have to constrict yourself. Gratitude and faith that asks, we're not done listening to God yet. What is next? So our goal isn't 100% participation in a pledge campaign. It's more than that. It's 100% participation in God's mission. Where do you see yourself responding to God's mission? Maybe that's pledging. Maybe it's time or talent. But all of that helps us be able to do the work that God has given us to do in a way that helps us be confident in peace and where we can continue to say yes. So I invite you to discern what your part will be in sustaining the shared life. I'm going to invite, let's see. We're going to move into questions and answers, and I'm pretty good at running a microphone, so I think I'll do that. But one thing as we go into questions and answers, you can ask any three of us a question, and we will respond or look back and forth at each other and go, you, no, you, no, you. So, with that being said, would you like to anchor us, please?
And why don't we get the other handheld mic out there too? So, there was a reason why we ended with Reverend Robert. I think you can tell. Having said that, the intent today again was to provide additional information. Maybe you've seen it before, maybe you haven't. I'm sure you have questions. And the intent here today is, and I will say, from my point of view, I was senior warden under Reverend Jim. He had a different approach. Under Reverend Robert, and to some extent under our interim rector, Reverend Dan, we're trying to be more transparent, more open, and share everything. So don't be shy.
Yeah, Bruce, John Farley. What was the vestry's kind of original thought way back when creating the budget to vestry funds, which is essentially, I think, budgeting to a deficit? How was that contemplated and come up, and the thought behind that?
Bruce, why don't you come up, just so folks on we're being recorded, so it's important they hear.
Okay, John, that's a great question. We did not intentionally budget a deficit into our budget. So the fact that we had these reserves, which the vestry could utilize, it sort of became a place where we could go, if we had to cover deficits in our budget. Now, you'll notice that up until 2023, we did not use that heavily but in 2023, it was felt that we had no choice, and so the use of vestry funds ramped up a lot. And then we fairly shortly after that realized that this is not sustainable. So it was something that happened to us as opposed to our planning it that way.
Good point. Over here.
Can I add to that, please? The vestry funds are given for the ministry of the church. So part of it is not just planning for the deficit, it's also for a fund for us to be able to ask, what is God calling us to do next? And then to respond to that as best we can. Now, it just so happens that in a number of years, we had more of those funds available. So that led us into a place where we thought we could step out into a little bit more risk, which included in 2018 hiring a fourth priest, me, under the assumption that we could continue to grow. And we saw that growth because we had a clergy person who was focused on newcomer incorporation. So, and then the pandemic happened, and we started to burn through those reserves faster than we had anticipated.
Please, Scott.
All right. Scott Williams. These questions are actually coming from my wife, who's the smarter one in the family, but she had to go to choir. Firstly, they're also about the endowment fund, but I don't think they're too in the weeds. Would you classify it as more conservative or not in terms of like the returns or what we truly invest in? And secondly, why do we have to go pay professional investors for it when pretty sure we have some very smart financial minds here too?
Sure. A couple of quick responses. First off, John Kilmer is the chair of the foundation trustees. There are a number of trustees in this room. I'm one. Bruce is one. So it's not just us. We don't talk about those folks too often, but they're faithful servants. We meet regularly. So the first question, I was already on the second question. The first question was, how is it invested? So we have an investment policy, first off, and we talk about that from time to time. But to cut to the chase, the funds are approximately, I'd say today, something like 60-70% equities and 20-30% fixed income with a few alternative investments. Now, if you're an investment type person, we can talk about all the details and this fund and that fund and blah. The big picture, though, Scott, is for a true endowment means you can't spend the principal. It's there forever. So therefore, you want to invest for the long term, which leads you to invest more in equities. But there's a balance. So we are not seeking short-term return. We are seeking a stable return that grows, and there's a lot of room for maneuver in that. And the second question is, or the answer would be that, as far as I know, is ever since I've been here, we've always had a third-party manager. Now, there are pros and cons. Again, it's a good question. I'd just share my view. It is really helpful in a church setting to have third parties and professionals bring an amount of objectivity versus and we have investment professionals here, and they're really good, and many of them are, in fact, trustees on the foundation because they bring that experience. But we don't want to end up really having this person say, well, I think you're all wrong, and we should put it over here, and that person say no, and all the potential conflicts of interest that could arise. So it's a fair question, but to date, we've always used third-party managers. They do cost us. We pay them something. The trustees meet regularly with them, and we review their asset allocations. We set policy. So again, deep topic. Hope that answers it.
That's great. Thank you.
Right behind you, Phyllis.
Stephen Herman. Two questions. One is, when somebody pledges X dollars as a general pledge, and then during the year they make contributions to the food drive, cash contributions to various things that are specified, how does that show up in the budget? Or how does it make a difference between those, how it's given? And then the second is, I presume that we have that our compensation package for a new senior would make a difference in this budget, and I'm wondering how that's accounted for, if at all.
I think, Bruce, you're best placed to answer the first question, certainly, because I don't know the answer. And step up.
Stephen, repeat that one more time, the first question.
The first question.
I remember now.
Okay.
Pledges
It's just a matter of pledge versus plate, and does it really make a lot of difference? Not really, unless the restriction that you put on that additional plate income is so restrictive that we have to do something other than use it in typical operating procedures within the context of what you've designated it for. And the second question is a really good one. We think that the new rector is going to be a significant expense. And so we're working on how that fits in the budget. But it will make a difference.
Yeah.
So it's not in the numbers we have?
No.
It is not in the numbers yet, no.
No. I think it's not my purview, but I've been there before, which is I think the budget will likely try to be cautious about that because we don't know when the new rector will be called. So again, one of the challenges we're facing in this time of transition is, we want to be fiscally prudent and conservative. We also want to answer that question of we want to do more ministry. We want to grow. We want to be challenged. And there's always a little tension in that, right? I think it's healthy. But I can tell you under Reverend Jim, he wanted always to do more ministry. And that's in one reason why I would say vestry funds arose was because Jim was always challenging leadership. Let's do more. We need to do more. Well, it to some extent takes money. So I don't know the answer how that'll turn out. The budget is informed, honestly. It will. A lot of people spend a lot of time on that. Reverend Robert, would you add anything to the question of how to plan for the new rector and the salaries and the compensation? And from what I know, we want to offer an attractive package. Of course, that's part of calling a new rector. It's not the only thing, but we want, for this size church, you heard from Trish, we're pretty unique. There aren't that many churches like St. Barnabas across the country. There are many. But anyway, Robert, on that point?
I would just say that is something we're looking at how to work that into the numbers, and when a budget is presented, we'll be clear what we think that number represents and point that out so that folks know, okay, you have a budget here, what is this fairly large expense? And for us to say that is an assumption that we'll have a rector at some point in 2026.
But the 2024 numbers included our interim rector, so it will be. Do you think it will be it'll be higher than what we spent in 2024? But we're not talking the entire compensation being absent from the 2024 numbers.
No, but it's going to be larger.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it'll likely be larger than what we spent for Dan Brenner.
They're calling it. Who do you want?
Question for Braden, from Braden.
Lori Sue asks, are the foundation investments in socially responsible funds not in companies involved in tobacco, alcohol, firearms, and weapons of war?
Again, I'm not the chair of the foundation, but I am one of the trustees, and I'd say to date that has not been a policy that we have adopted. And I don't know the answer specifically because the funds are invested in diverse investments. Some of them are actually, many of them are funds of funds in essence. So I couldn't honestly tell you. It's a question John Kilmer might be able to answer. We probably have to go to the manager, which is Wells Fargo and Russell Investments, to find out. But I think the key message is we as a church have not adopted. The foundation hasn't proposed that policy to the vestry, and the vestry is the governing body. So it's a topic for discussion, but to date, no, we do not try to recognize more socially responsible investments, however you want to define that. We've tended to look at this as being good stewards of our investments and trying to seek a reasonable return wherever that might be. I see a hand in the back.
I do have one more question.
Oh, sorry,
from Zoom.
online.
No, you're good.
Yep.
Marga asks, which accounting software was recently implemented? She's glad to see a focus on the process improvement. And do we have an alert or forecasting process for a percentage of vestry fund spend to prevent future challenges?
Very good questions. We had used a system called ACS, and ACS upgraded to what they now call their Realm system, and they've been hinting for years that they would stop supporting ACS as we know it. So while there are lots of benefits to the new system, whether or not we had a choice is still a little bit of a question. The one thing about it is that it's user-friendly, and we're trying to get to the point where if somebody came up to us and really wanted to see a picture of the financial statement of St. Barnabas, we just punch a button and get it done. Over the last 20 years, it's gotten so complicated that has not been possible. So I think this is a major step in the right direction, and we're exploring all the things that Realm is going to be able to do for us.
Let's take one more question. I see Tish back there has his hand up. I'm conscious of wanting to not shortchange our 10:15 service.
Wonderful presentation. I'm Tom Tischer, and I've been involved with this church for a very, very long time. 5 different times, as a matter, since I've moved around the world. But it's been on such a wonderful path. And you brought up the audit that is being done to grow the church, which I see as what our job is here, is to grow the church. And we solve all those problems that we've discussed today, our challenges, by growing the church. And the audit that's going on, did you say that's being done by Manny?
Reverend Robert?
Manny is heading it up, but we're talking with an outside consultant. So we were given a gift to make that possible. So he's the one who's interfacing with the outside consultant, and that's been part of conversations that have not just been with Manny, but with a number of different staff members.
And when will we get a report or feedback on that?
I'm not sure what their timeline is, but I would expect probably within the next 4 months or so.
Before.
The solutions to the problem are with us, and we can do this together. And as many of you know, I'm involved with an AI company, and in Hawaii in a big way. And Immediate Now AI has a huge advantage for this congregation to look at. And I've been ridiculed by everyone in this room for my doggedness on at least looking at it as a solution for growing the parish. It's an answer that should be looked at. And I mean, I have a $50,000 investment in it. That's it. And that's 0.5% of the company. So it's not a big investment, but it's a passion of mine. And my goal is to get everyone in Hawaii able to get AI for their kids and for themselves with the Alpha School and what I'm founding is the Omega School. And we surely can get it used here in the parish. But I'll mention it to Manny again.
Thank you, Tom. I would agree. I think AI is a great future. It's an important question, and our leadership, I'm sure, is thinking about it. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone, for your time. I'll be around. Bruce is around. If you have more questions, find us.